You're behind the blue curtain. All right, and we are live, so we're gonna hit the transition button. Hello, welcome to Derps Talk About Games. I'm your co-host Mango,
And I am your co-host, Buddy.
and today we're going to talk a little bit about WoW Shadowlands Season 4 and also some random other nonsense. But before we do that, Buddy, why don't you tell the folks at home what it is we do on this podcast?
On this podcast, we like to talk about games, and I'm very excited that we're gonna get to dig deep into Shadowlands Season 4, right? So this week is the last week in Shadowlands. Next week, we switch over to 10.0, the Dragonflight pre-patch, changing a whole bunch of systems or whatever. Obviously, we're going to be on Shadowlands content for a month. Dragon's Flight doesn't come out until November 28th. But for all intents and purposes, I feel like this is the last week of Shadowlands, right? And I'm kind of interested to kind of hear and talk a lot about what Shadowlands Season 4 was trying to do. Did it accomplish those goals? What worked? What didn't? And we can just kind of like, I don't know, get into the weeds on it. Is that sound good?
Yeah, no, as part of this, I went and listened to part of our Season 3 podcast, just like the beginning part of it. Because, frankly, for those at home, the reason this is also going to have some nonsense is we don't know if it can fill the full hour. And I was looking to see, because I couldn't remember if we had done the whole raid review, since I had not beaten Heroic Jailer by the end of Season 3.
Wait, were you there when we killed it like 2 weeks ago?
Yes.
Okay.
And that was, I think that was last week.
Shit, was that last week? I don't know.
Yeah, it was last Tuesday. Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, so yes, let's talk about that. The things we were anticipating at the end of Season 3 were like this tokeny loot system for like targeted loot. And also there was and faded rates. Those are the big kind of things. Yeah, so I guess those are the things to start with. I think this is the easier question: is do you think this it's like strange coin or whatever? I believe it's
the dinars. Yeah,
the dinars. Do you think that was a successful mechanic?
I do think that it was a successful mechanic, and my recommendation, like, I think it was something I would like to see return in the future, but I would like to see it return in the future in a very particular way. Part of my thing about Shadowlands Season 4 is that I actually think it was kind of incorrect for it to be a brand new season in a way. What I think I would have preferred is for this all to have been Shadowlands Season 3, kind of, sort of, if that makes sense. With the dinar mechanic maybe essentially being a bad luck protection sort of system that gets implemented halfway through the patch cycle.
In like the 0.5 patch?
Yeah, exactly, right? Like I think that this is the perfect example of what a 0.5 patch should look like, right? You with a 0.5 patch, maybe you shuffle up I think this is my pitch. This is my overall pitch. In the 0.5 patch, you introduce a new raid, right? Which is a reskinned old raid, right? You are kind of timing up a raid from the past. Let's say Throne of Thunder from Mists of Pandaria, right? Fan favorite raid. Everybody likes Throne of Thunder. All of its loot, though, is the same eye level of loot as stuff that came out of whatever the current patch is, right? Normally in WoW, a new patch brings a new raid, right? So for the first 0.0, the first couple of weeks, 3 months of a patch, right? You're raiding in the new zone, and then the next 3 months, because you get the 0.5 patch out, now all of a sudden you have a new raid that is kind of akin to sort of like the faded raid, and they give equivalent gear, right? So if you're in a raid group like ours, where we're generally hunting for AOTC, we're not really looking for gear a lot of the time later on in the season, right? Well, now you have a whole new set of like a whole new raid to clear, a new version of AOTC to get, right? Like something new to sort of like push for, right? And I think alongside that, it makes sense to introduce dinars as a way to allow people to really fine tune their builds, right? Something that I think is kind of interesting is the interaction between me in the beginning of a season getting a lot of gear that's really useful really quickly, right? Because every boss is dropping something that's powerful, every raid is dropping or I'm sorry, every mythic plus dungeon is dropping something that's powerful, and then slowly over time it comes to this point where I'm fine tuning my build, right? Where I'm getting a slightly better, like this maybe has just slightly better secondary stats, or I'm replacing this ring with an equivalent ring in terms of eye level, but much better stats for me, like that kind of a thing, right? And I think that at that point, it makes sense to introduce dinars as a way to give people the cool chase items that they are looking for in the raid, but just haven't had the luck to get to drop yet, basically, right? And in this way, I think you can kind of tone down the number of bosses to kill. The dinars, it took not a million bosses, but it took a couple of weeks to sort of kick in. My thing would be you clear a raid, like you do 1 week of boss clears, right? On the 0.05 patch, you get your first dinar, you get 3 of them, right? And you sort of like move to the next level. The one piece of all of this that I actually would recommend sticking around even in the 0.0 patch is the upgrade tokens that come out of the bosses, right? Being able to clear heroic bosses and take those upgrade tokens to upgrade a piece of normal gear into heroic, I think that's fantastic. I think that's perfect, and it is a baseline system that should be represented in World of Warcraft from now on, right? Just because it solves so many issues that sort of are underlying, different bosses, right? We call this the we called this the Shriekwing problem in season 1, where everybody kills Shriekwing week 1, but you have to kill Shriekwing every week after that, and there's just no fucking reason to do it because no one needs the gear anymore. It is literally just like this content blocker, right? But putting an item that just says, hey, if you kill a bunch of raid bosses, you can make this thing that'll upgrade to heroic, like your heroic gear, at least gives some value to, killing bosses along those lines. And I think that that's really useful.
I agree with that. I also think that like I think the way I would do it is I agree with you for the most of it, but I would say instead of doing the like 15 10 5 thing that they did, I would reverse it. I would do 5 10 15 and let you repeat the 15 ad infinitum. Because I think that's like enough that like if you want to use it to like grind gear, that's like a lot, right? Like, and maybe I'm falling into the trap that WoW designers always fall into is like, well, if we make it grindy enough, people won't grind for it, but instead they're mad about having to grind for it. But the
Really
thing,
interesting.
like that. So the big thing to me, my biggest disappointment with the token system was not anything about the power level. Right, I was happy to get my 3 pieces of 278 gear for free, right, or relatively for free. My biggest problem with it was that I was tempted, and I did mostly spend my tokens on Mog, right, because there were drops that that's like. It seems weird to say this way, but it feels like Mog is a harder thing to target than like power level in some ways, right? Because with this faded mechanic, right, the faded raid rotated every week, and I may have gotten like a 278 shoulder, but like it's the same Mog as like a piece that I already had, right? So like if I never got a shoulder, say in say Sepulcher, but I did get it. But like I got a 278 shoulder in Nathria. Power wise, I'm fine, but I want that Mog, and so maybe I want to spend my token on Mog. So just a way to kind of like keep doing that, so like I could get Mog a little bit easier in season, I think would be neat. But that's.
I think that's actually kind of clever. Part of me thinks that this isn't going to be a huge deal, right?
Right.
One of the things about the faded raids is that there's 3 of them, right? So there's a lot of different gear, and your opportunities to fight certain bosses are muted, which is to say that your opportunity to loot an Edge of Night off of Sylvanas, you only fight the Sylvanas 1 out of every 3 weeks, right? So you have a lot less opportunity to get that knife that you want off of her, essentially. But in a world where there are 2 raids that are equivalent at the same time, there's actually fewer stuff, like fewer like cool chase items to get in those raids that make you like go really hard, right, and want to kind of break your back in order to pick up these items, which makes me sort of think that maybe you don't need to worry so much about like giving people a ton of bad luck protection, because like the number of chase items, like the pool is smaller, therefore it is easier for people to get the chase items that they want, right? That said, I think that's actually kind of a clever solution to just like picking up pieces of like Mog. I would like that a lot, actually. Especially because it's normal, right? Like it's normal gear. And at a certain point, just kind of everybody stops running normal. And that's true. That's fine. I think that that makes sense for a lot of guilds, right? But like, how many times have I left behind sort of armor sets because we're not running normal anymore, and I would be able to sort of like pick those stuff up. I like that suggestion a lot.
Yeah,
I think I agree. I
I
think
mean,
I agree with
and this is gonna sound kind of dumb, but like because we've been running normal, I don't have any of the raid finder colorings of any of the gear, right?
Mhm.
And like maybe that's incentive for me to go into raid finder, but like an alternate way to do that, like or like being able to run raid finder, get like DNR tokens and spend them on pieces of raid gear for colorings, I think would be a neat thing to do too, something
Yeah.
like
I mean,
that.
honestly, at that point, you can even make dinars the like current, like maybe it's not even one, maybe it's like 3 dinars, right? But you make dinars the currency for um you make dinars the currency for picking up an ensemble, right? You put in the same way that
Oh yeah,
that they exist in, like a covenant sanctum or whatever. You just put like the maybe you say 3 dinars, you and it's 4, and you can just pick up the appearance set for whatever it is. I think that's great. I think that's a
yeah,
fantastic
yeah,
idea.
yeah. That would be really
But I'm
cool.
sure, I don't know. There's maybe like tech limitations or something kind of along those lines. Obviously there's a certain level of like, do you want to invalidate the hard work? For instance, Mythic, right? Do you put Mythic in there for a certain number of dinars? Do you put it up there at a scaling number of dinars? So you say maybe 5 dinars. Now I use 5 dinars. I pick up the Mythic set, but it's like, well, now am I sort of like invalidating the work that Mythic Raiders are doing, right? Like, I don't know. Those
I,
are all tough questions.
I think you make those work on like vault rules, and you say like you can
Yeah.
do 5 dinars for the mythic appearances, but only if you've cleared mythic, the mythic version of the bosses, right? Like,
Sure. Yep. That would
uh,
make sense.
uh, I mean, I also think that like I think if I were going to like off the cuff design the system, I would say that you get a leveled dinar based on what level you clear, right? Like normal gives normal dinars, heroic gives heroic dinars, raid finder gives raid finder dinars, specifically so that you give like top players a reason to go into raid finder and help the schlubs along, right? Other than like waving your peen, right? Um,
What if I really like waving my peen though?
well, then you
My
could then you could do raid finder, right? Like you're
Yeah.
not.
Yep.
Um, uh, but yeah. Also, so with your vision for this, does this include like this rated or not rated faded mechanic on top of it? Like on the point 5 patch, does normal become faded?
I don't think so. Maybe it does. I think probably not, and here's
Okay.
why. I think the thing you're really looking for is variety, right?
Hmm.
And one of the things about Shadowlands season 4, is they scaled up the tuning of Castle Nathria, they scaled up the tuning of Sanctum of Domination, right? But those are still relatively recent raids, right? Like these are raids that we have done in the not too distant past. You and I remember Painsmith. We think Painsmith is a good boss. You and I remember Fate Scribe. We think Fate Scribe is not as good of a boss, right? I never Throne of Thunder was 10 years ago, right? Like, and if you're throwing that raid at people as progression content again, I think it just effectively functions as a new raid at that point.
That's fair.
Maybe some people have incredibly long set memories, but like that has got to be some tiny percentage of the audience, right? And at that point, you don't need the faded affix in order to make the raid feel new again, right? You are essentially just giving them a new raid by leveling up sort of this old raid. But I do think that there are issues with some of this, right? Like, so for instance, the current breakdown that we have of raids, right, which is to say LFR, which is to say LFR, uh
Normal, heroic,
normal, heroic, mythic,
like,
is something that came about in Warlords of Draenor, right? So that was sort of codified essentially 3 expansions ago, four expansions ago, depending on how you kind of count it, right? So like let's say I was building this for 10.5, right? The first mid-season patch of Dragonlance, or sorry, Dragonflight. Well, can I bring Throne of Thunder forward when Throne of Thunder was built on 10.25 like 10/25 level scaling, right, with normal and heroic versions for sort of both. Is there a way, like, are the fights designed in certain ways? Like, you might need to put a bunch of work into sort of redesigning those fights in order to make it worth it. And I would actually kind of argue that that work is worth it, right? That the amount of work that an encounter designer has to put in to sort of patch forward or like kind of re-mechanize a fight in order to make it like good in a modern context, I think that that would be like worth it, right? But the expectation, I think, that I really have is that you would maybe just go WOD, like from Warlords forward, right? You would say that's our cutoff. These are raids that we can basically scale, and so we will basically scale them and not really worry too much about it. And sort of like move on from there.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like if if you're Blizzard and you want to like bring in these old raids, what you do is you start with WAD and actually work backwards to give your team more time, right? So that
Oh, sure.
you've got a little bit more time to do Pandaria and a lot more time to turn fucking or what's the Molten Core into like something that's like playable, right? Because as you pointed out when Classic came out, I was like, Molten Core was down real fast, right? Because like that was more of an organization problem than it was a like a mechanics challenge.
Yeah, I mean, even Wrath Classic, right, going on right now, it's more of an organization problem than anything else. And I do think that, I think if I'm an encounter designer, like, I could probably look back to raids like in Ice Crown Citadel or something like that, and figure out really cool, interesting things to do with those raids to sort of level them up to sort of modern standards, right? Like, you could add a bunch of mechanics, you could change certain mechanics around. I'm sure that you would have to do a bunch of work on the loot tables, right? So for instance, something that's happening in um Dragonflight Season 1 for Mythic Plus is that they're adding items to the loot tables for Halls of Valor and for Court of Stars in order to better round out that like loot. And I think maybe you could do something similar. By the way, Reese in the chat says my experience with Wrath Classic rating has been entirely 100% organizational stuff. Fair enough, buddy. I've been there. Especially because that was in the time before. It used to be that 10-man and 25-man rating were equivalent, right? But in Wrath, they were not. In Wrath, if you wanted to do a 25-man raid, you got better gear for that, right? Which is pretty different, which is pretty interesting. But I bet, like, man, if I'm an encounter designer, right? Like, imagine being able to go back to Ulduar and, like, redesign key fights in that raid to make them, like, new and interesting again, right? That's kind of sweet. I feel like I would go nuts for that.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. Especially for like, I feel like a lot of people. I mean, there's obviously a lot of people who have played the game for like many years straight, but like for like people like me who have dropped in and out of the game like per expansion, like I have like this is the first expansion I think I've played all the way through, besides WoW Vanilla when it was originally out.
That's so weird, actually. If you think about it, like I don't know that I've ever heard an expansion that people hate more, right? But on like the Mango litmus test, like,
yeah,
it was kind of.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's extraneous reasons for that, right? Like, sure. I mean, I feel like that's maybe an episode in its own. Is like gaming habits, how they've changed, right? Like, I've got less time for it, and I've got less time to like say, like the other game that I've played this year is Elden Ring, right? Like everything else has been like relatively small potatoes.
Sure. Yeah, and also there isn't the same sort of demanding. Honestly, maybe this is because we're old men now. We're getting like geriatric in our old age. Because like I think we the other games that competed against it are more fleeting and less interesting, right?
Yeah.
So for instance, League of Legends was also pulling a lot of our time, in Legion 6 years ago or whatever. But now when I think back to League, first of all, I hate that game for obvious reasons that we've talked about a million times on the podcast. But when I think back to League, I think a lot about the individual sort of game, not the overarching experience, right?
Yeah.
When I exit Shadowlands, I'm exiting Shadowlands with all of this new stuff that I have accumulated over the course of my time on my character. And I'm sure if I went in and I typed /played, it would be fucking disgusting and I would be so grossed out with myself, right? But also at the same time, right, like I get to bring that stuff forward. I don't really get to do that with League. With League, definitionally, most of the game resets between matches. At the most, maybe I bring forward like prestigious skins, right? Obviously, I got the Victorious skin for a couple of seasons when like when I was playing, and you play into gold and you get the end of season skin or whatever. But like, I don't know, I just care so much less about that than I do like my Keystone Master mounts, right? Or the ahead of the curve mount that I get for the jailer, that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, and I think this is actually we've talked about this briefly before with like the problem with battle passes, which is
Yeah.
there's like no real sense of accomplishment for any particular piece of thing, right? Like this is the thing that Destiny designers talk about is like you want a story behind a piece of gear, which
Yep.
I think they sometimes miss the mark around, like the Destiny people in particular. But I think that's like the right idea, right? Like I think that's why WoW can stay compelling because like I have a bunch of like LOL skins that I think are fun, but like the story behind that is I took out my credit card and I paid, Riot Games $10. And that's basically it.
No, that's super true, right? Like, I mean, we'll talk about this more in the back half, but I have been playing a ton of Overwatch 2, and the thing that is getting me to play Overwatch 2 is the Genji skin. They have this new mythic Genji skin that is like customizable. You can do different paint jobs. You can have different pieces of the gear. The sword will look different depending on what you choose or whatever. And I think that's fucking sweet. And I want it. And the only way to get it is to complete the battle pass, right? And that kind of thing really motivates. It is literally the entire reason I'm playing that game. I'd probably not be playing Overwatch 2 if it was not for this really, really choice piece of content that I only have access to because of like the battle pass and this structured sort of achievement that goes along that kind of goes along with it. And I feel like WoW just has a really good way of doing that around around raids, around Mythic Plus, right? Like even on a lower level, right, outside of the achievements like ahead of the curve or whatever else, you also have things like doing the achievements for the individual bosses, right? So tomorrow we're going to do the achievement runs for whatever raid. I don't know what raid we're starting on, right? We're going to do the achievement runs for that raid on normal and complete these special things because that also rewards amount. Also, transmog is a thing, and doing the raids, you're going to walk out with a bunch of new pieces of transmog, right, for weapons and armor that are going to look good, and I'm always going to have access to those things kind of going forward. And I think that's really valuable, right?
I
That
agree.
feels good in a way in WoW that it doesn't in other games.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree. But yeah, so otherwise in S4, so rated, we kind of obliquely talked about it, but faded raids as a mechanic. What did you think of that?
Interesting. Okay, yeah, so I did think that the affixes were cool and engaging is what I would say. They were engaging, but I feel like they only mattered because of this specific context of season 4, right? So in a version of things like if we go by my hypothetical pitch, right? Like I obviously explained, on the 0.5 patch, we kind of size up an old raid, we bring it into the modern era, and we say this raid is now at parity with whatever the patch raid is, and you can raid, like you can raid in both of those frequently. I don't think you need a faded affix for that. I also don't think that you need a faded affix in a world where you are whatever, I lost my train of thought. But the point is that I think the only reason that you need the faded affix is because of like the recency of it, right?
Right.
Maybe honestly there's a version of things where in the 0.5 patch you introduce a faded affix, right? But you introduce it for like the to spice up, if I'm not bringing a new raid, maybe that's too much work. Well, maybe I add the faded affix to on the 0.5 patch to the raid as it exists, to just kind of layer a new mechanic that'll help people sort of like change up the fight. But even that, I don't know. I don't know that I love that. I don't know that I think that
Yeah,
makes sense.
like I could see maybe it working if it's like if it's 10.0.5 or no 10.1.5, then you bring it on, you bring the faded affix on like the point oh raid.
Oh, I remember what I was gonna say. Yes. Okay. So the thing I think you could do with an affix that would maybe be interesting is you make it part of the weekly schedule, right? So let's say it is 10.0. The first raid is out, whatever it's called, Vault of the Incarnates, I think is what it's called. You do that raid, 10.1 comes out, boom, new raid. Vault of the Incarnates is sort of left in the back burner. But here's what you do. you introduce the faded affix, and you just put it on that weekly schedule, and you say once every 2 months, Vault of the Incarnates is now going to give kind of good gear again or whatever. And when you do it with this affix. I think I don't like that idea, and I wouldn't recommend it, but I think it's another use for the affix that would be like interesting.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah, I also so I'm going to say that I didn't actually find the faded affixes particularly compelling, but we
Yeah.
also I don't know. I think this is more on our group than anything, or like my own lack of interest in like going and finding like a more serious rating group. Um, but like we were doing it on normal and it was not hard. And so like it didn't really feel like it was just like buttons to click on. My favorite part of the faded affix is when it did like the orbs that you killed a bunch of, and I could like spin a bunch, and I could get like
Yep.
juice my fucking DPS numbers, right? Like that was the thing that I enjoyed the most about the faded affix. Which I don't think like again, I think part of that's like just the peculiarities of the way that we rate. But I would have also liked to have seen something a little bit like more bespoke, maybe. Right? Like I know this is a lot of work, and so like it's not a realistic expectation. But I would have liked if like the faded version of the raid had like a bespoke new mechanic for each fight or something.
Yeah, no, I actually agree with that. I think one of the big problems with the affix is that it has to be generalist, right?
Yeah.
You have to make an affix that you can kind of tack on to any fight without disrupting too many things too badly. And I don't know. That seems like a I guess I'm pretty down on the affixes is sort of where I'm coming, coming back from. I feel like the real answer is to sort of like so for instance, the reason that I think it's not a good idea to introduce the affix as a way to sort of spice up these raids on like a rotating weekly schedule is the thing that I like about raiding is the progression of it, right? Is to walk in week after week and get further every time. And so the faded affix and the rotation of the raids kind of disrupts that feeling in a way that's not like fun because like when I do progression, quote unquote, on a boss, that progression resets 3 weeks instead of 1 week later, if that makes sense, right? If we fail to get heroic Sylvanas down with the faded affix, the next time I get to try heroic Sylvanas is 3 weeks later, and that's just like not as interesting. What I want is to create a new, like I want to create a new version of progression, which is why like that would be the thing that I would be interested in scaling up an old dungeon or scaling up an old raid, right? You can progress if in the point 5 patch releases a kind of updated version of Throne of Thunder, I can now progress Throne of Thunder in the way that I would progress Sepulchre of the first ones. So yeah, that's my thought. That's where I'm coming down on that.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Um, Other mechanics from season 4. I don't even know if I can like think of any that are like particularly
So
significant.
another one is Mythic Plus.
Oh,
I do want to say that Mythic Plus is different and it's interesting in season 4, and I don't know if I like it or not, but we're gonna see where it goes. My Mythic Plus group has obviously been, we've been together since 9.0, right? Like um we got the very first KSM mount kind of together. Like I ran into them through Pugs, and we've been playing sort of ever since. And weirdly, season 4 kind of broke us. And the reason why is because of this weird issue of learning the dungeons were tuned insanely hard, right? And it kind of turns out that learning a new dungeon in Mythic Plus is like kind of daunting. It's a more daunting thing than we realize. And I know that's going to sound sort of weird and maybe wrong because this is sort of the opposite of what a lot of people have been talking about, including myself. I think I said I was really excited for season 4 just because, going back and doing some of these old mythics sounded so fun and so kind of compelling. But the sort of reality is that maybe the repetition of doing Halls of Atonement for the millionth time is I kind of miss that, right? I miss Theater of Pain. I'll say it. I'll say it. Teatro del Dolor was one of my favorite dungeons they have ever put in this game, and I used to just run that on Mythic Plus all the fucking time. And putting in new dungeons, especially new dungeons that didn't feel like they were fair, I guess is what I would say. Yeah, Reese in the chat says, I didn't learn what half of Lower Kara was until week 2 or 3. Yeah, it's because Lower Kara was just like not tuned, right? You know, I had such an issue with Grimrail Depot, and it wasn't because Grimrail was hard, right? Like I don't think that that dungeon is hard. I think that that dungeon is actually kind of easy when you know it, right? The thing that was bad about that dungeon was the mechanics were illegible, right? There just was not a lot of visibility. You were watching and it was like, where the fuck is this lightning on the final boss going to fall? I don't know. Guess I'll die, right? And then eventually they would fix this stuff, right? They would hotfix in improvements into the sort of like visuals or whatever. But I think a version of things where season 4 launches with those versions of the dungeons, right, that are at the very least completable in a reasonable time frame, right? Maybe that sort of works. Honestly, Lower Karazhan, the fix to Lower Karazhan would have just been updating the spawn location, right? Because the way that you spawned in Lower Karazhan was just like incredibly brutal. If anyone died and had to run back, they had to do this super long run in order to like get back to you. You just waste like minutes on that, and it's just like, man, we really could have done better than this, you guys, right?
Fair enough, I guess.
Yeah.
I did not do any Mythic Plus stuff, so I cannot comment on that experience.
Yeah, literally a Burning Crusade run back. Yep, that is how it felt. I don't know. It's stuff like that. I think that there are times when it is fair and times when it feels unfair, right? Like there are dungeons that have really brutal runbacks, and that's just kind of a piece of what the dungeon is about, right? Plaguefall was a good example of that in earlier Shadowlands, right? Where you know you could just really get hosed if you died on the wrong pack, because now all of a sudden you're wasting 2 minutes on a run back with like your full party, right? Or Halls of Atonement could also be really brutal with this. If you died in Halls of Atonement later on, you're right, like let's say you know you kill Echelon, you fuck up the pack after Echelon, which is a pretty dangerous pack, right? Like not super easy. That's a real problem. That's a real issue because you know you shroud in order to get up there, and now all of a sudden you have to talk about like, oh well, how do we deal with all of this shroud stuff kind of going on, right? And I think that Karazhan was just a particularly bad implementation of that sort of set of mechanics. But we're gonna see what it's like in Dragonflight, right? I think maybe the answer is that me and my Mythic Plus team were really just kind of burned out. I was certainly burned out. You know, Immortal Empires dropped, and all I wanted to do was sink so deeply into the world of Warhammer Fantasy that I would never return, right? And so that's kind of where I came down when it comes to a lot of this Mythic Plus stuff. I will say, however, that Valor and like that Valor and rating are great mechanics that have stood the test of time, right? These are things that we talked about earlier in Shadowlands, like season 1, right? And the kind of question was, hey, are these going to be good? Are these going to work? What do we think? The answer is we think they're great. We think they're fantastic. They make Mythic Plus such a good system, way better. And you know, the carrying that stuff forward, Mythic Plus now is better than it has ever been. This is a definitive statement of fact. There has never been a better time to run Mythic Plus dungeons. There's a lot of reasons to run them at a high level, a lot of reasons to run them at a low level. The gearing is fun and satisfying, and you can really kind of fine tailor your experience. And I think that all of that just like works like gangbusters.
So we were talking earlier about keeping kind of the upgrade mechanic from the faded raids. What do you think about like doing a Valor style system for raids instead of like the discrete coins?
Maybe.
Okay, that's fair enough.
I don't really have a better answer than
No,
I like the coin. I think the thing I like about the coins is that the coins come in at a base level, right? The coins come in at normal, which by that point, like a lot of the time, you don't really need them, right? What you can do is you can combine a coin and the heroic upgrade item in order to make something out of it. And I think maybe you could make something like that work. You know, like with Mythic Plus, you create some version of the coin that says you complete a certain number of dungeons, you get a coin, and then you can trade that into some vendor for a really powerful piece of kind of chase gear. That makes a certain amount of sense to me. Mythic
so
Plus.
so I'm actually asking the inverse question, which
Oh,
is
really?
instead of so like the heroic faded raids gives you the upgrade item, right? What if instead of that the heroic raid just gave you valor and you can use valor to upgrade your normal
Oh,
raid
true.
items?
So the one thing is that I would not want to cross pollinate between them, right?
Okay.
I think Valor would remain a Mythic Plus only system, but let's say we get a new thing, we call it Justice Points, whatever. I could probably see that, and I could probably, I think that would work. I think honestly, the real thing that I want from all of that stuff is I want a way to make a normal item into a mythic item over without ever touching mythic, right? This is a very a particular thing. Maybe it just hits us because we are kind of a heroic only raid group, right? But I feel like it is fair. It is a fair ask for like me as a player to the developers. It is a fair ask for me to maybe, let's say, if I kill 40 heroic bosses, if I spend a month clearing the raid, I can take two. Okay, this is my pitch. Right now, here's how it works. Every heroic boss you kill drops one thing. You can combine those in. You combine 20 of those into a heroic upgrade item. You take a piece of normal gear, bump it up to heroic, right? I think it would be fair to take two of those, combine them together, make a mythic upgrade item, right? That does something similar. Because if I look at that at the long stage, right? I am spending 2 months killing heroic bosses. That's one item a season, right? But I should be able to take my very coolest, most powerful piece of gear, the thing that I am most interested in, whether that's a trinket or a weapon or whatever else, and I should be able to take that and bump it up to mythic item level without, you know, without stepping foot into mythic. Obviously, I think like most of mythic gear should be locked behind mythic rating, but saying to a player that they get one piece of mythic gear without touching mythic, that seems fair to me.
Yeah, I think if you wanted to make it like really, really fair, is you don't grant the appearance if it's an appearance bearing item.
Oh,
Like
sure. Yeah.
that way you still like you have to do mythic to get the mythic appearance, which is like the pride point, right? That's like the showy off piece. But like I think eye level is a little bit less sensitive to that kind of thing, right? Because like that's like
Yeah.
so I think I agree with you on that. Like with that caveat. Yeah. Was there anything else in season 4 that was like particularly impactful?
The one other thing that I wanted to mention in season 4 was the introduction of the Veil Strider achievement. Do you know about the Veil Strider achievement?
No.
Okay, so the Veil Strider achievement, which is very cool, and I almost wish that I had said it before, um, is a kind of capstone to single player content in uh over the course of the expansion, right? Veil Strider, it wants you to do all the dungeon. Actually, not necessarily single player, but just kind of like it is sort of an overview of the Shadowlands expansion, and it says do everything, and you get a cool title that goes away when Dragonflight launches, right? So, in order to get Veil Strider, you need to level up your renown on everything, right? You get renown 80 on all 4 covenants. You need to do all of the story quests. You need to do all of the raids. You need to do all of the mythics. You don't need to do them on a high level. It's not like you need KSM and AOTC. You just need to, like complete them in Raid Finder or whatever else. You need to do a bunch of Torghast achievements, right? You need to get Flawless Master in Torghast, which is doing the top level of Torghast, all 6 wings flawlessly, right? You need to do like some achievements that are in there when it comes to sort of like Torghast stuff. You need to do the conservatory, like the 4 kind of covenant sanctum features, right? So the conservatory, though it's not actually the conservatory, it's Marasmius, the mushroom for Night Fae. The abomination factory, the Ember Court, the Path of Ascension, right? You need to do a couple of achievements, not the full achievements, but just like baseline achievements for those, right? The ones that say just kind of do everything, just do some stuff, basically. And maybe that's it. Maybe there's like some other. Oh, and you have to do the meta achievements for the single player content in 9.1 and 9.2, right? So in 9.1, it's you kill all the tormentors of Torghast, you you do all of these achievements surrounding the invasions and the maw. You do all this stuff with the Korthia like elites and treasures and shit like that. Same thing with Zereth Mortis, right? You do all of that stuff in Zereth Mortis. You get this sort of capstone achievement to that experience. And it all feeds into this one title that is sort of like the single player version of KSM, right? Veil Strider. If you do this before the end of the expansion, you get Veil Strider, and that's cool. I love this. I think it's a great implementation. I want to see it more, and I hope that whatever the final patch of Dragonflight looks like, the end of Dragonflight looks a lot like the end of Shadowlands, where it kind of encourages me to go back and do a bunch of stuff, right? Like clear all of this stuff when it is current content. One of my things that I never like doing is going back and doing old achievements when it is no longer current content. That's not fun, right? Something that I spent a lot of time doing in Battle for Azeroth, for instance, was Mecha Done, which is like the Mechagon achievement that like came out around that time. Same thing with there's a Nazjatar achievement that came out around that time. I think both of those achievements were great. And there was this, and this is those achievements are capstones to patches. This is an achievement that is a capstone to an expansion, and I think it's cool. So that's it.
Does that expire at the end of season 4? Does that expire when Dragonflight launches?
When Dragonflight launches, I fucking hope so. I'm pretty sure it's when Dragonflight launches. If it expires next week, I am fucked.
Okay. Well, maybe that's a thing for me to do over the next month because I did not know about this, and it sounds like neat. But yeah. Yeah, so for me at least, like I have not put a ton of time into season 4. Like I've done raids and like some other like little nonsense, but I have enjoyed kind of just like, running through just things like doing economy stuff, right? Like the new like the merged auction house for materials. Great. Love that. I'm not making as much money, but I sell everything like without having to think about it. And I watch my number go up, and I get to buy fancy new mog off the auction house, and that is what's important to me. So,
yeah, I'm really interested to see how that plays out. We've never seen this, right? Like this is a very recent addition, and I think part of the reason that it is working the way it is in, Shadowlands, is we're at the end of the expansion, right? The market is flooded with materials because you have millions of players who are just like running around gathering whatever Sinvir ore
yeah,
or whatever else, and dropping it in, and dropping it on the auction house just because they happen to take a second out of their, like out of their world quests or whatever. What's that going to look like in Dragonflight though, right? When all of a sudden supplies are incredibly limited and there is an insane demand because you have people who are leveling their professions for the first time, right? That's going to be me, right? I'm going to be going really hard on professions. I made 18 million gold over the course of this. No, more than that. I made a lot of gold over, like, in terms of raw revenue, probably maybe 100 million gold over the course of this expansion, selling legendaries or whatever. I want to repeat that sort of thing, but am I going to have to spend down my million gold in is sort of an investment on materials in the early days of Dragonflight just because it's going to be so hard to pick up items? Who knows? We'll see.
do you think it's going to be worse than like what we had in our like kind of small server? Like, I feel like as much as demand is going to increase, supply is also going to increase a lot. So Reese actually comments, beta forums say that blue skinning Matzo is still really rare, which is what absolutely killed me from learning Legos and Shadowlands. I could see that. Like, if I think it's going to depend on how they gate the rarer materials. Like, I think that's the big one.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, like, just from like a pure economic standpoint, right? If you're not doing like this, like the same kind of gating you are, or if you're not doing more aggressive gating than you've done in the past, on materials, then the gathering professions are kind of fucked, right? Like they don't have as much value to churn into stuff, right? Like you're just kind of like selling them at a very reduced price, and so that like decreases the relative value of those professions. Whereas historically, they've been kind of the more valuable money making professions because everybody always needs mats. And you've increased the supply and then like made the demand weirdly, so like because the demand is server specific for the supply and demand of like the crafted items. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Like you said.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing that I think is compelling is kind of creating a real space for gatherers to specialize, right?
Mm.
Um there are going to be profession items, right? That they've talked about where, if you are a miner, you will be able to mine more and better gear, or I'm sorry, more and better materials because of your gear. And I think that is really compelling, right? The idea that I can specialize as a gathering class and be very good at gathering large quantities of high demand materials, right? Being able to throw that up in the auction house, that's really interesting as a way to turn that profession into something of a real moneymaker. Especially because I am never the person, the correct thing to do economically for someone like me, right? If I were following sort of the logic, would be to drop gathering professions on all of my characters, because at the end of the day, I just buy these gathering mats off the auction house. I have churned through hundreds of thousands probably of materials all over the auction, maybe even millions, right? Like if I think about just like the raw amount of stuff that I've had to buy in order to make legendaries. So functionally speaking, right, like the thing that mattered to me was the crafting profession, right? It was not the gathering profession. um but being able to create a way for me as a blacksmith to also specialize as a miner to get the items that I really want to get, I think that that's really, really compelling. And gonna be, I don't know, some good, interesting stuff to work with. I think the upgrade to professions is the biggest sort of question I have about Dragonflight. I'm pretty like I get it for everything else, but professions have yet to click to me, and I'm sure that it's just because I haven't spent a lot of time on the beta. I haven't seen a lot of people talking about the way that the professions are going to work. Um, and until I do, those things are going to sort of be up in the air.
Yep, no, that makes sense. I, of course, am waiting to see if engineering is something other than the weird dead end that it always is. Because I still like it, right? Like I like having my electrostatic restabilizers or whatever they're called. I like doing my fun little thing, but at some point, I kind of run out of things to do as an engineer. Um, but I'm also okay with like living with engineering as being kind of like the throwaway profession that's like just for kicks. It isn't really that practical, but one can dream. One can dream. Uh, but uh, but yeah. So do we want to do some nonsense because we've talked for 45 minutes about Shadowlands season 4?
I think that's done. I'm done with Shadowlands stuff. That is
Yeah,
that's my take on Shadowlands.
yeah. I mean, hey, we're at the end of the expansion. How do you rate Shadowlands as an expansion?
Oh, that's a really tough question. I think the answer has got to be pretty highly, right? Like here's my thing. Here's always my thing. Humans are naturally progressive, right? We get better at things over time. If I look at any of the individualized systems in Shadowlands, they are, and I look at the pieces of those systems and I say to myself, would I want to see this in the future, right? Do I think that this is better than what came before, right? If I look at legendaries, yeah, I think legendaries in Shadowlands are better than legendaries in Legion. If I look at professions, yeah, well, I think that professions in Shadowlands were better than professions were in, whatever Battle for Azeroth Legion previous stuff. If I look at rating, I look at stuff like season 4. I think that the items are altogether much, much better, right? Like the trinkets are better and more interesting. I am chasing gear in a way now that I never used to do. And getting rid of Titan forging, right, and war forging has sort of made my whole life sort of more deterministic. I just said on the podcast that I think Mythic Plus is better than it's ever been before. Really, like, and when I answer all of those questions as yes, I don't know how it's possible for me to say that Shadowlands is like a worse experience than any other expansion out there, right? Just because it has so clearly improved on each of these individual sort of levels. But there is an argument for sort of a weaker than the sum of its parts, right? Maybe there is something to Shadowlands where even if we can say that each of these systems individually has been improved upon by like over its predecessor, um the overall holistic experience was worse for whatever reason, right? um I probably think that's true of Shadowlands comparatively to some of the other expansions I've played, maybe just under I don't know. I think I would have said that BFA was my favorite expansion ever. Did I say that? I must have said that 2 years ago, right?
I don't remember.
And I loved Battle for Azeroth. God, I loved Battle for Azeroth so much. I think maybe I like Shadowlands worse than Battle for Azeroth. I don't know. It's so hard. I don't know. It's so hard. I you know, I don't know. Can I argue with numbers? I've played so much Shadowlands, and I've played so much more of Shadowlands. I think Shadowlands is the best expansion that I've ever played. Actually, now that I'm really going down on it, just I've played so much of it, and it got me involved in the game in a new way that I had never done ever before, right? Which was the improvements to Mythic Plus attracting me as a player to that sort of game mode and that game system. And I feel like just on the back of sort of that sort of piecemeal logic, right, where I think that Shadowlands improves individually on all of these separate systems. That yeah, Shadowlands is my favorite WoW expansion. Or is the best WoW expansion I've ever played. I don't know. Favorite is so tough. I like need a little distance before I say favorite.
Yep, that's totally fair. For my part, only expansion I've played all the way through. So I think by default it kind of has to rest in that place.
Right, that's exactly what I feel. It has to be, right? Like I played so much of it.
Yeah, the only complicating factor here, and I think it's a real thing, is COVID, right? It played a big part as to I think why I played so much Shadowlands, right? It's like it is a social experience in a world where a lot of social experiences were stopped. So that's the only thing I think that argues against that. But otherwise, I think like you said, like the proof is in the pudding, or the proof is in the slash played, as it were. So yeah. So in terms of other nonsense, we didn't have a ton we wanted to go over. First one was Super Mario Brothers trailer dropped. What'd you think?
It was great until Chris Pratt fucking opened his stupid mouth. Oh my god. I don't know how hard I want to go on this. I think we all know that Chris Pratt is not a good voice for Mario.
Yeah.
But the moment it's the
I would have said the same thing for Luigi, but I think that Charlie Day, the little he spoke in the trailer, I think that worked. So maybe
I don't know what Jack Black is doing that is so good.
Yeah,
but he is killing it. Get on his level, everyone else. I don't know. Part of me just thinks that I think I disagree with the conventional logic. There's this conventional wisdom that says you just get the voice actor who's been doing Mario for years, make
Charles
him
Martinet.
do it. Yeah. I think that's actually incorrect, right? And here's why. I think that Mario games are not built on story. You don't actually need someone to voice a character. You need someone to voice a wow, yeah, woohoo, right? Like you need that, right? For any real Mario game, essentially. And so it actually does make sense to change out the voice actor. And I think I agree with the just bottom level logic of we need a new voice actor. But man, I just feel like you could have gone so many different places. You could have found so many different people who would have done a better job than Chris motherfucking Pratt.
There is a part of me that wants to do that Soprano screenshot. It's an anti-Italian American discrimination.
You could do Michael Imperioli, right? Like the guy that plays Christopher Moltisanti in The Sopranos. He's having his moment with Sopranos. I'm sure he would come back to like do his really hardcore, Italian American accent. I don't know. Reese in the chat says this movie is going to absolute bag when Mario is not on screen. Yeah, I fucking agree, buddy. Like that's true. Lou says the game Mario voice would get exhausting after 5 minutes, which doesn't mean Pratt is good. He isn't. I absolutely agree with that. I just feel like he is like you can't do someone who has that really recognizable voice, right? Or is unwilling to transform his voice. This is the thing. I actually think Jack Black has an incredibly recognizable voice. I heard Jack Black in Bowser, but he's doing something incredible, right? He's not doing Poe from Kung Fu Panda, right? Which is maybe the most recognizable Jack Black voice acting sort of thing, right? But like Chris Pratt is like Seth Rogen. He doesn't do anything but himself. And when you hire him, you are hiring him for like the Seth Rogen voice or the Chris Pratt voice. And you just can't do that with Mario, right? You just need somebody more talented than that. So that's my take on the Super Mario Brothers.
Yeah, I think I genuinely agree with you. Although I will say that I almost like fell out of my chair laughing when they did the kind of like, you know, first couple notes of the theme song and then they like bomb it out. Like I just like I saw I was like, oh my god, they fucking did it for the Mario movie of all fucking things.
Yeah, I actually think I like that trailer a lot. I think the thing I like about that trailer so much is the focus on Bowser, right?
Yeah.
Not having the focus be, you know, you can imagine a different, worse version of this trailer. It's okay. Here's what it is. You fade in, and it's a green pipe, and the camera like zooms down the pipe until it gets to the opening, and then it starts zooming up the opening, and you see Mario flying, and then it freeze frames, and he starts narrating to the camera. Like, that's maybe the worst version of this trailer that I could possibly imagine. But I think that was a real possibility. They could have gone there, right? Like that could have happened.
It's like Mario.
So,
It's like Mario, like just like trying to like running away from Bowser's flame. It's like wonder, you know, like you like the, you know, the fucking Sonic movie thing, like, you know, like pretty serious situation. How did I get here?
Yes, absolutely. You could have done that. You could have also done, you know, just like really dumb things in sort of like the script. I actually think that something about we don't know obviously, but something about Mario is that I don't think you want to be I don't think you want to do bathos, right? The world is fundamentally incoherent is maybe the word I would use for it. It doesn't make a lot of sense. And I think bringing attention to that with any form of bathos humor is just fucking stupid. It is the dumbest thing that you could possibly do with a script like that. And so you need like a certain amount of sort of like earnestness to it, but you can imagine a like Guardians of the Galaxy kind of trailer, right? You know, or like Suicide Squad. One of those sorts of trailers that is just so exhausting, right? With that like Joss Whedon, you know, like writing that people complain about on Twitter. So yeah, like the trailer really does avoid that because like the drama with Bowser is played for laughs, but it is played for sincere laughs, right?
Yeah.
The joke is not that the world is inherently like dumb, right? The joke is just that this guy is outmatched by the raw fury and power of Bowser, right? And so like I think that works. So, you know, in a certain sense, good trailer. In a certain other sense, he sounds like fucking Linda from Bob's Burgers when he says, "Here we go."
Yeah.
We'll see.
I wonder if he's gonna do, if like if it's gonna change it all. Like we could see like, you know, a Sonic level change, right? Like, not like, and because it's just the lines, right? Like that's an easier thing to change, right? Like, you know, you just change the recording. And hey, maybe they just picked a bad moment for him, or maybe they put like, this would be some like big brain shit. I don't know if I believe it if it would happen, but maybe they put like a line where he's very obviously being Chris Pratt in the trailer, so that when like a parent sees it sees the trailer, they're like, oh, I like Chris Pratt, I will take my kid to see this movie, right?
Yeah,
Like
I would not be surprised if there was just some like really insane market testing going into all of this, that says that you make Chris Pratt voice it. And
I mean, Chris Pratt being the choice is definitely a market testing choice, right? The thing I'm wondering about is if like maybe, and this is like a pipe dream hope, right? Like the voice is actually better, and they put like a very Chris Pratty line in the trailer to like convince parents, to bring parents to get their kid, you know, go watch the video game movie or whatever.
That I don't think that's real, but I admire your hope. You're daring to dream. Right?
Yeah. All right. So what was the other piece? The other piece of nonsense, which is like, I don't know if there's much to talk about it, but
I can't believe this. But yeah.
6 seasons and a movie. We're apparently getting a Community movie. The only scuttlebutt around this that I've heard is like, like rumors are that Donald Glover is interested in coming back, and Dan Harmon said something about like I don't know if Chevy Chase could come back even if he wanted to because of like how much it blew up on the set.
Yeah, I don't know. Dan Harmon and Community. We still have yet to do our Community episode, but we will. Maybe that's like a series of episodes. I don't know if we want to like break that down season by season like we've done other shows. But Dan Harmon and Community are really like foundational pieces of media, but I actually have a really hard time going back to them. I've watched those shows, or I've watched that show like back to front a bunch of times, but in a weird way, I almost sort of like wonder if it has outgrown its moment, right? And it is sort of like looking back on a piece of history that is kind of like no longer there. Like, I think a lot of people would say Community is their favorite show. Obviously, Dan Harmon would go on to co-create Rick and Morty, which is like a huge thing. By the way, I caught up on Rick and Morty, and I'm happy to talk about that. We can talk about that in the back half, and maybe after this. And so like he's got a level of prestige now that he didn't have at the time, right? As sort of, Dan Harmon's thing was he was just sort of an amateur screenwriter. He did one movie, like the movie like Monster House, I think, which was just like, like some CGI movie from 2006 that was nothing but like, that's a screenwriting credit, right? Dan Harmon had a also had like a little like independent sort of circle of like friends who would do this thing called, I think it was called Channel 101, right, where you show up with a 1 minute short film each month or whatever, but like a bunch of cool stuff. Rick and Morty came out of that, right? A bunch of cool stuff has come out of that over the years. And that's kind of like his big like claim to fame, but like yeah, maybe he can fucking direct this movie now. Holy shit, right? um
Yeah,
I
I wonder if Rick and Morty got him like the clout, and he's just like, I want to finish what I started, right, with the
yeah
6 seasons in a movie. Yeah,
I also think that part of it is that nobody's really kind of had the breakout success after Community that maybe they deserved. Obviously Danny Pudi, Abed. I kind of think Abed is the best character in Community. And he does the best performance, right? But like the people who have kind of walked away from Community with the most are probably Donald Glover, and Allison Brie. Um, and maybe there's just like something to kind of like getting the gang back together, right? Like this is something that stopped Firefly. Firefly did get a movie, I guess, but as people were doing big reunions all over the place, nobody ever wanted to do a Firefly reunion because everybody from Firefly is like really successful doing their own projects, right? Doing big doing big projects on in TV and film or whatever, and so it's just like impossible to sort of like make that work when it comes to scheduling. But Yvette Nicole Brown, right? Like Jillian Jacobs, Joel McHale. I feel like these are people that you can pick up, right? You can
yeah.
get yeah
Especially because like Joel McHale has his own career, but it was like never doing like TV. It was always like being like the
yeah
host of like The Soup or whatever the fuck that was, right? Which is
yeah
like
and
it's a talk show thing, but it's like a thing you can like not do for a little while,
yeah,
like do a movie, right?
exactly. It's exactly what I
Yeah.
was thinking. So,
Um,
I also, and the other thing is, I don't know how a show like Community, which I guess I want to say is sort of like a movie show. Like, how do you make a movie out of a show that went so big as to make, like these two-parter episodes that were spoofing Star Wars and, the Call of Duty, like intro to action cinema or whatever, right? Like they did so many things over the years that were basically just like movies. I just sort of like I wonder what you can do to make that a feature film.
my guess is you know how they would occasionally like do like the winking at like Abbott would wink at the camera and be like, I guess it's a bottle episode or something like that. I
Yeah.
think you make this movie like the frame is this is like Abed's final project.
Oh,
Um,
maybe.
or something like that, right? Like you have it like you have Abed doing like, and maybe this go like I could see this very easily going off the rails in like a bad way, where like you make it like like you have Abed like kind of like doing that like fourth wall breaky but not too bad type of thing that he does, and you do that for the whole thing, and that's like the plot is like Abed doing his final project, I guess that or like you maybe you do. I guess it's been long enough. You could be like, this is like 10-year reunion, right? Like,
Whoa, maybe that would
yeah.
maybe be a thing.
But yeah,
God, getting everybody back for a reunion at Greendale Community College. What a world that would be,
yeah,
Orion.
yeah. So just to kind of like transfer out of that a little bit, you said you were going to talk about Rick and Morty, maybe, but
I do
just
want to talk a little bit about Rick and Morty.
But before I let you do that, I do want to say so. I have been watching the first season of Community again. Basically, my girlfriend and I agreed that I would watch a season of Dairy Girls for a season of Community, which is a terribly unfair deal that I'm probably going to have to change.
Wait, I'm sorry. A season of Dairy Girls?
Dairy Girls is like it's the story of like,
Oh, okay, yeah, I do know this.
it's like a Netflix series. It's a bunch of girls at an Irish Catholic school growing up during the Troubles. Very funny. But to the point of the deal that I made, there are 6 episodes in a season of Dairy Girls. There are 3 seasons of Dairy Girls. There's much more Community than there is Dairy Girls. So, but my girlfriend's been a trooper. We've just been like plowing through Community episodes. But Dairy Girls is very funny. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about that later. But just like kind of like watching that first season of Community again, a lot of I had always thought that like it maybe had like kind of an arc like say Seinfeld did, where it like really kind of like ramps up. Like the first season's like kind of like relatively normal, but it's not. It kind of gets to Community status relatively quickly, which I really appreciate. I think the biggest thing is like I've got this kind of like vague notion that like Britta gets Flanderized a bit as the seasons go on, and like I can see that like she's not that bad yet. Also, I also feel like Pierce maybe like gets it worse because like Pierce is a jackass, but he's also like definitely has a heart of gold in this first season. And I'm wondering, and I don't remember the.
Maybe we should save this. I have a really spicy take about Pierce. That is, maybe I can summarize it. Okay, so here's my thing about Pierce. Community premieres in 2009, right? And a land like I would consider it a landmark article. Maybe other people wouldn't, but an article about politics came out. I think it was 2011, right, or maybe 2010, by Matty Iglesias of Vox, which was called "The Great Awakening," right? And it was talking about how the biggest shift in politics that was happening was the sort of embrace in the white liberal undercurrent of politics of sort of, like really kind of hardcore academic ideologies, right, that we've talked about on this podcast, right? Intersectionality, feminism, racism, all of that, class, all of that stuff kind of like comes up and it gets adopted by basically a third of like the liberal base all at once. And this happens right in 2010, right? And I think a part of that shift, right, that he talks about in this article, what is the moralizing of that, right, which is basically taking academic concepts, right, these concepts that had existed in academia for years and years but had never really penetrated anywhere, and kind of when they got brought into the popular consciousness, they got brought in with a sort of ethical and moral undertone, right, which is not just to say that racism exists and systemic racism is a thing and here's how we study it, right, that's kind of the academic approach. It is also to say racism exists. So we call it systemic racism. It works in this way. And also, it's categorically, ontologically evil and bad, right?
Do you know what the Long March through the Institutions is? Because you're basically describing the Long March through the Institutions.
Oh, I actually don't know. Well, I don't know. I haven't read this article in years, but I very much agree with
the Long March through the Institutions is kind of like a bigger thing, and it's usually brought up in kind of like a Red Scary kind of way because it kind of directly applies more to communism than it does to like these things, but it's got parallels, which is essentially like, these things are contained to the academy, but the academy teaches the young people, right? And because they have like the Long March through the Institutions, they've captured the institutions, and then the products of the academy are these students who believe these kind of like moral things that are like, the framing of the phrase Long March through the Institutions is essentially like ideological capture of your children, which can get crazy real fast. So I don't want to
And to be clear, I'm not trying to like. This is not a politics podcast. We're not talking about the politics. I'm not making a claim whether this is good or bad. I just want to talk about the phenomenon that happened. So anyway, so it enters the pop culture consciousness and it gets infused with this moralism, right? Where you are now in a world where making racist jokes on Twitter is something that will get you horrifically attacked, right? Because like there is a righteousness that comes along with this feeling of whatever, systemic racism is bad, feminism is, good, all of this other sort of stuff, right? I think Pierce straddles that line, right?
That seems
Of
about right.
when it happened. So when he first started, he's making racist jokes, but he's making racist jokes in the way that like maybe a more classic sitcom might, right? The Office will do this, right? With Michael Scott, right? In early episodes of Michael Scott, he's making really cringy, insensitive jokes that we would in a modern context call racist, right? But we sort of look back on them and we kind of go, it's a product of his time, whatever. His character kind of like develops away from it. When Pierce is making those jokes in 2009 and 2010, with this huge moralistic kind of undercurrent underpinning all of this stuff, he is categorically transformed into a villain sort of just by the culture, right? Or by the culture around him. And I think that is the thing that underpins what sort of happens to Pierce and how and kind of how Pierce works. And I do actually think that Community is a pretty political show. I actually wrote a paper about this in college when it was airing at the time. I was like, Community is like a really staunchly political show because it is so varied and diverse, right? Like the cast is insanely diverse, in terms of ethnicity, in terms of like religious background, right? Like you have Abed is a Muslim, Annie is Jewish, right? Troy is Jehovah's Witness. You have different ages, different like wealth disparity, like all this stuff is really kind of at a 4 in Community, and it is sort of like the show of diversity and all of the cool, funny, interesting things that can kind of come out of all like all of that or whatever.
But it also turns around and mocks some of those things too, right? Like
oh yeah, like Britta is just as much a punchline for being sort of like overly, and I would say like
or like the dean like makes a big deal about like how diverse the group is, right? Like like this is like great.
I see what you mean. Yeah, in universe it is also yeah. It is lampshaded, or not really lampshaded,
but it's a joke. But yes, I absolutely agree with you. In fact, I would take it maybe a step further and say that like Pierce like goes from like it's not so much like, or it's not necessarily just like the Michael Scott level thing. It's like he makes a type of jokes that people like the same people would have made 4 years ago, and then will like delete those tweets and like attack, like this is like the thing you see like every like third week. Somebody drags up some old tweets from some person and it's like. Yep. Like, that was fine at the time, but like it's being dragged down. Like that's what happens to Pierce. So like, I absolutely agree with you on that front. I think that makes sense. I think that makes a lot of sense. Also, it doesn't help that like, apparently Dan Harmon and Chevy Chase were like at each other's throat for the entire fucking time. Right. Like,
and like Dan Harmon has talked a lot about his time on Community. Like he was basically drunk the whole time. He sexually harassed one of his writers into like oblivion, which was later a Me Too thing. But like, he apologized in an incredibly public way on his podcast, and she accepted his apology and was like, this is the model for what a good apology for this sort of thing looks like. I don't think you should be in jail. I just think you did something that was really shitty to me. And so like that's a whole complicated, right, like piece of the puzzle, whatever the case may be. Community was once my favorite show on television. It was and I, even though I have had a weirdly hard time going back to it, I'm excited to see what's next for the movie. Anyway, I was gonna talk about Rick and Morty. Yeah, I caught up on Rick and Morty, and it's actually kind of great. I didn't expect to be here. The fourth season. I think a lot of people what was the last thing about Rick and Morty you remember? Like Pickle Rick, maybe?
I was gonna say like it's it's not Pickle Rick specifically. It's the kid going to McDonald's to get the sauce and Pickle Ricking on the table is like right around when I was like it's not because I like, I'm not so shallow to be like somebody cringe likes this, I won't like this anymore. But it's about the time that like reached enough like cultural like diffusion. I was like, I will eventually get around to this, and I didn't. So that's like the last kind of big thing that I remember.
Okay, I need to get my seasons straight so that I make sure I'm talking
I
in the
think that's
correct
like
order.
season 2 or so.
Okay, so Pickle Rick is definitely season 3.
Okay.
Um,
Because like season 2, season 3 is around when I stopped like waiting, like, anticipating episodes coming out and like watching them immediately.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I think a lot of people's peak really was Rick and Morty season 3, and then a lot of people sort of like fell off in Rick and Morty seasons 4, 5, and 6. Now, I think season 4 does sort of suck, and I wasn't a huge fan of it. But then I watched all the way through season 5. And Rick and Morty season 5 is like secretly fucking genius. It is really good. And I kind of can't believe it. Part of this is that I do know that between seasons 2 and 3, they did a really aggressive rewrite, or not rewrite, a really aggressive sort of restructure of their whole studio. Basically, they were in a really shitty studio. There's a lot of like industry jargon. They were in a really shitty studio. They were working with a really shitty studio. It was really like bad, kind of toxic work environment. They got away from that studio, basically used the success of Rick and Morty to create their own studio, like whole cloth. And were able to sort of make things much better and more kind of like equitable. That process was happening in seasons 3 and 4. I think season 3 is pretty good, and there's a lot of really good like iconic shit. I actually think Pickle Rick is one of the best episodes of Rick and Morty. It's just that it is fundamentally misunderstood by everyone who watches it like a dipshit, right? Like
I
the
don't even
point.
know if it's fundamentally misunderstood. I just think it became a meme, right? Like,
Yeah, that's probably fair. Um, but the stuff that kind of goes on in season 5 is just like, one of the things that happens at the end of season 4 is this sort of promise that they're no longer doing sort of like canon continuity based episodes. They're just kind of going, they're just kind of going kind of point by point, right? I think, or like the episode by episode doing episodic adventures. I think that works okay in season 4, but not great. But it works really well in season 5, so that when like the canon stuff does kind of return towards the end of the season, it's actually really satisfying and like fun and interesting. At the end of the day, I don't know that I think Rick and Morty is a really like good show. I don't care about it a ton. I still don't care about it a ton. But there's just more stuff that you get out of some of those later episodes of Rick and Morty that are just like really compelling material. And I guess I'm coming here and sort of recommending it, even though my intention is to not do it, because it was so fucking cringe to be anything associated with Rick and Morty when the stupid fucking Szechuan sauce thing happened. Like, it just immediately overnight turned Rick and Morty into the biggest cringe thing in the world.
yeah. Kind of just like to go back to what I was talking about. Watch the first season of Dare Girls. That is a hilariously funny show. I highly recommend it. Again, it's about like what is it? 1, 2, 3, 4 girls and a guy going to an all girls Catholic school, during the Troubles, and the Troubles like factor into it quite a bit in the way that I didn't. Like it's kind of like permeating their everyday life. And then like it's a very funny show, and then every once in a while, just like something from like I don't want to spoil it too much, but the end of season 1, like the season 1 ends on a fucking like shot to the fucking heart. Like it's like Jesus fucking, like one of the episodes is, it's like so I am not super familiar with the Trouble, so forgive me if I misunderstood it, but they are living in, I guess they're living in Northern Ireland, and it's basically a holiday where the Orange Men come out and like parade, right? And they're a Catholic family, and their house is along the parade route. So like, we need to get out of town because the Orange, and it's like they're not so sure where they really need to be, but like they're like driving out of town, and they're like, they take a wrong turn. They're in the middle of this like parade of like Orange Men who are like staring at this very obviously Catholic family, and like things are starting to get a little bit rough, but it's all played for laughs, right? And then they get out to the country and they find out that they've got somebody stowed away in their trunk, and what's like the implications there are like, and they do enough for like somebody who doesn't know, right? Like it is foreshadowed, because it's like, we're taking a clock with us, like this big clock. And so one of the characters hears it ticking. He's like, he's got a bomb. He's, you know, like, you just like, that's like the implication there, right? And like, it's all played for laughs. And then every once in a while, it's just like kind of like, and it's like, it is hilarious and it's great. And I highly recommend it to everyone because it's a hilarious show.
That reminds me. Have you ever seen the Four Lions? Have I ever talked about Four? I think it's called Four Lions, but I could be wrong.
I have not.
Okay, Four Lions is what I'm thinking of. It is the darkest film I have ever watched in my entire fucking life. Okay, so
Have you seen Dear Zachary?
Okay. So yes, I have seen Dear Zachary. Dear Zachary is in fact darker than this, but Four Lions is a comedy, so it is the darkest comedy I've ever seen in my life. That's what I meant. This is where Riz Ahmed came from, right? You know, who would end up being a big movie star in a bunch of other places, right? The premise of Four Lions is that they are four Muslim guys and actually technically one white guy, but who just identifies really hard with like being Muslims, and they are planning a suicide attack, like a suicide bomb attack in England. And the whole thing is like played for laughs, but it's also just like, holy fuck, like these guys are trying to like kill innocent civilians. You know what I mean? It's just like, it is the darkest shit I've ever seen in my entire life. And it sounds a lot like that. It sounds a lot like that.
Yeah, no, I mean, it is, I'd say a little bit less than that, especially because, like, you know, part of it is that, like, these are four schoolgirls, right? Or like 4 or 5, you know, they're 4 or 5 school children. They're not, you know, politically enmeshed in the situation. It's just happening to them. Okay. But it's still very good. But yeah, so that's Dairy Girls. Other thing I wanted to do is I've got another drink review.
Oh, let's go. Big drink reviews. Hell yeah.
So this is probably a mistake. It will probably keep me up too late, but I have a Japan exclusive flavor of Monster, Cuba Libre, which, if you don't know, Cuba Libre is like a booze drink, right? It is a rum and coke with lime, and I think this is supposed to replicate that taste. I got this from the exotic faraway place of the Japanese grocery store in Boston. So,
fuck yeah!
Cheers. So I like that. wouldn't say it tastes exactly like a rum and coke, but it's pretty good. It's got a little bit of like that energy aftertaste, but that's really good. 5 out of 5 stars. Tastes like, has a bit of like, it does taste like Coke with like a little bit of a fruity note, which I think is supposed to be like the lime. And I guess the bitterness is supposed to be the rum, but I don't know. I should probably not drink this whole thing if I want to go to sleep tonight, but Derp approved Monster Cuba Libre.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah. So the other thing that I've been doing with my week that I wanted to talk a little bit about was playing Overwatch 2. And right, like, and I mentioned this during the cast, obviously. The thing I want this stupid fucking Genji skin, right? It's so fucking cool. I don't know why I think it's cool. I don't even really play Genji, but it's just like the FOMO of it and it's new and it's interesting has gotten me to play this game that I otherwise actually quite like. I think Overwatch is a really good, solid game. It is so good that I have been queuing up on my own, which I haven't done that in a game in a long, like in a multiplayer game, solo queuing in a multiplayer game. I don't like, when was the last time I ever did that, right? And I think a lot of that has to do with the battle pass, which ironically is getting so much shit, right? People are so mad about the Overwatch battle pass, and I do actually kind of get it. And the reason why is a couple of different things. One is that Overwatch has moved to a shop system in the same way that like League of Legends has a shop, right? So like when you want to buy a skin, you just buy it directly. But technically speaking, that means that the prices are insanely inflated, right? So for instance, somebody went through and they cataloged all of the skins that they owned from Overwatch 1 and then looked at the corresponding prices to those skins and found that they had spent $10,000 on Overwatch 1 just by putting time into it, by getting skins out of loot boxes or whatever else, right? and how it feels really crazy, right? That like you would be able to do a similar, like that you would be able to do a similar sort of thing when it comes to like Overwatch 2. I fundamentally disagree with this and think that it is stupid as fuck. This is literally just League of Legends. This is the League of Legends price model. I feel like people were fucking talking about doing this for years, right? Just give me the skins in a shop and let me buy it for $5, please, right? Or $10 or whatever the amount of money is. Um, and then they have a battle pass, which by the way, League also does a worse battle pass, if I kind of remember correctly, to when I did in fact buy the League of Legends battle pass, which is maybe harsh. I haven't played League in a long time. Maybe it's better now. Who knows? But it's just like they basically just made Overwatch 2 League of Legends, but they did one thing. They did one thing, Mango, that I think is fucking genius, and I wish every battle pass did this. It bothers me so much now that I have played Overwatch. I tried to go back to the Hearthstone Battle Pass, and I was like, oh my god, this sucks in comparison. I completely forgot. All of the levels are the exact same amount of Battle Pass experience away from one another. They are all 10,000 experience. So it doesn't do that stupid bullshit thing where you get the first 10 levels of the Battle Pass really quick, and then every other level of the Battle Pass is like aggravatingly slow, right? You just every couple of games you get a battle pass tier. That's it, right? um and having that thing be a very like even cadence means so many good things for Overwatch 2. For instance, when you have daily challenges, you have weekly challenges, which are kind of like quests or whatever to complete to get battle pass experience. The weekly challenges are all 5,000 experience, right? Which is half of a battle pass tier. And that's the thing. It is half of a battle pass tier no matter if you are in week 1 or you are in week 9, right? At the end of the battle pass, you are still getting this much of a tier, right? And the battle pass tier, the challenges, the daily challenges, if you complete 3 of them, or if you complete like 5 of them or something, I don't remember, it's like some number, I think it's 3, you get 10,000 experience, or you get 9,000 experience, so basically a tier. So it is just, the numbers are so simple to like run your head around, and they make for these really, really achievable goals of, oh, I'm gonna sit down and I'm gonna complete my daily challenges in Overwatch, and I'm guaranteed to get a battle pass tier out of that, right? Oh, I'm going to crank out my weeklies, right? And when I do 4 weeklies, I'm going to get 2 battle pass tiers out of that. Like very, very simple. The thing that I think sucks is that the battle pass tiers are like don't always have a lot of value. Every 10 tiers is a skin, right? And there's plenty of stuff that's locked behind premium or whatever. I think it's pretty good. It's a $10, it's a $10 battle pass. To just get like a bunch of skins seems like a pretty reasonable sort of price point for it or whatever. And over the course of like over the course of playing with the game, I just feel like I'm hitting these battle pass tiers pretty frequently, and it is so satisfying not to be in that situation where like I'm at the end of the thing and getting a single level is this huge fucking grind. I cannot believe how good that feels. That's it. That's the thing I wanted to talk about when it came to Overwatch 2 and battle passes. I don't think the Overwatch 2 battle pass is good because I don't think there's a lot of stuff in there that doesn't represent a lot of value. A lot of the time I go to the tiers and I realize, oh, well, I just kind of unlocked a bunch of bullshit like a McCree voice line or whatever else. But that's where I'm at. That's where I'm living.
That makes a lot of sense to me. I think the Rumbleverse Battle Pass is pretty good. I believe it's modeled on the Fortnite model. I have not noticed if there's like a scaling amount, like a scaling factor to it. But the big thing for me is that if you play enough, you can earn back all your fight bucks essentially. And I have gotten to that point. I have like 2 levels left in it with like a ton of time left on the season because I like the game. So that always feels good. It's like, I put $10 in, I got the $10 of currency back, and either, I'm willing to pay for it next season or, I don't have to, right? Like either I can spend that $10 on like, skins that are on the battle pass or whatever. But I thought it was a pretty good deal. So there's that. Other thing from my end is, this is going to be a little bit difficult to show, but I have a new keyboard. This is I've got it holding it backwards. This is a Moonlander. Mark One, I think is the name of it. Is a split keyboard. It is ergonomic. It has ortholinear keys, which means that they go straight up because your fingers don't move. Like, this is one of those things where, like, QWERTY was established to slow down typists. Also, your rows on your keyboard are offset because that was a mechanical necessity for the typewriter, like, arms to be able to hit the ink ribbon. Ortholinear is supposed to be more in line with your fingers. All this is to say that I have to relearn how to type on this thing because it's very different than typing on a normal keyboard. As part of this, like, so just as a note to people out there, this is a very expensive keyboard. You probably don't need it. I spent all my professional life typing for a long time. And I'm starting to, the way I rest my hands, I'm starting to lose feeling in these fingers. And this is supposed to help with that. So this is part of why I'm doing that. So I would, it's a very cool keyboard. Maybe you consider this, but it is very expensive. And I don't know, you can also get cheaper type of things too. But it's, for me, it's a professional expense rather than like a gaming peripheral.
Yeah, sure.
This is relevant to this show because as part of that, the company gave me a copy of this Steam game called Epistory Typing Chronicles, which is this little action adventure typing game. Essentially, you move around with the typing keys, and then if you see an enemy, you type a word to like shoot a fireball at it, and you kill enemies that way. And it's got like a few mechanics. Like, I recently unlocked the ice mechanic to go along with the fire mechanic, and you could switch between them, and you could do various effects on enemies with it. Some of which is just kind of like standard, like, match the element to the enemy type. And some of it's like the ice words freeze enemies, whereas the fire words set them on fire, and it will knock another hip of hell with them in a couple minutes. And it's pretty fun. It's actually like non-trivial in terms of its difficulty. I think it's got a few flaws, but the thing that stuck out the most to me is it's doing kind of like the highbrow story game thing. That like normally kind of gets associated like derogatorily with walking simulators in a game with like standard kind of game mechanics. And so like my advice to all the people out there that are like, I would like to do a walking simulator, is just put it on top of a typing game. I think that works pretty well. It's like doing the kind of like the heroine obviously is like, has some like, I think the game is ultimately going to be like about like anxiety or something like that, or like imposter shit. Like, excuse me. The game's kind of heading in that direction. It's like with essential messages, but it's got plenty of compelling gameplay in between, even if it's just typing stuff. So,
yeah,
I would actually recommend Epistory Typing Chronicles. It's like, I think like $15. I would not recommend buying this keyboard to get it for free, but if you're going to get the keyboard, if you are like me and you are a programmer who spends his entire life typing on keyboards, maybe look into that as like a business expense. And then you can get it for free. But I think like if your kid, right, needs to learn how to type, maybe that's it. Or if you grew up and you never took a typing class, you do hunt and peck, and you want to learn how to touch type, I can think of a worse way to spend $15 on Epistory. So that's my recommendation, or that's my experience with Epistory Typing Chronicles.
Okay, very cool. Wow, that's actually like really interesting, to be honest.
Yeah. I wouldn't have bought this game if I didn't get it for free, but I do think it's a neat game. So, yeah. What else? Otherwise, I did not do a ton gaming related with my week. How about you?
Really, it was just Overwatch. I also some Total War. And then I'm working towards Veilstrider on WoW. I've actually been clearing out a couple of pieces of I've been clearing out a couple of pieces for KSM too. It's funny that I never actually got KSM this season. For Mythic Plus dungeons. But it's just I want to play WoW, but I also want to make sure that I'm not like burning myself out into the new expansion. That's always like a fear of mine, right? That like I go insanely hard. Oh, actually, no, I did play something crazy. Now I do want to talk about this. Darktide. I played Darktide, which is the new sort of like co-op PvE game from Fat Shark, who are the people who made Vermintide. We actually went back to play Vermintide and played a bunch of Vermintide, which was actually a lot of fun. In fact, I might go play Vermintide after this is over. But the thing about Darktide is that it is in the 40K universe instead of the fantasy universe. And I actually don't really know all that much about the 40k universe. Like, yeah, like my knowledge of Warhammer lore is very fantasy rooted. It's not very 40k rooted. Even though I know 40k is the bigger game, and I have a passing understanding of stuff like Eldar, Dark Eldar, right? Tau, Necrons, Tyranids, etc. But Dark Tide is really interesting because it is not um character based, right? Which is to say that in Vermintide, you are playing discrete characters, right? You are playing, for instance, you are playing Barden Goranson, right? Who is the dwarf character. And you can play him as a few different classes. You can play him as a, like a survivalist. You can play him as an iron breaker. You can play him as a slayer, right? But at the end of the day, that's the same. That's like that one character. In Dark Tide, the idea is that you are on a giant prison ship, which is called the Morning Star, and you get to go through a character creation process. But it's like your character is like a prisoner. You're like a reject, and you're going down to this planet to like clear out whatever these like. They're not undead. They're like infected with something. I don't really know the lore. They're not Necrid
or Necrons, I think is the.
Hold on. Let me see if I can figure this out.
Or Necrons would be who would it be? Would it be Tyranids?
Tyranids are like the Zerg.
Yes. No, actually, the Zerg are like the Tyranids, because as you know, StarCraft was originally a 40k game.
Yeah. So take back the city of Tertium from hordes of bloodthirsty foes. In the depths of the hive, the seeds of corruption threaten to turn into an.
Oh, it's a chaos corruption in a seed city.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
What is the seed city? Do you know what a seed city is?
So it's like, if I know a little bit about the lore, but my understanding is it's like basically like a city where they just have a bunch, like it's like a ton of, it's like a mega city, right, with a ton of people, and they do the various like dark grimness of the 41st century or whatever is like, it's a hive of squalor that a bunch of people who are basically like laborers who labor away their lives and like live and die, without much meaning to their lives type of thing happens. And so like these cities are like kind of like, maybe it's hive cities, are like always kind of like in like the 40k RPGs or whatever, they're always like good focal points for like some chaos infestation to happen. There's like so many like disaffected kind of like terrible people that like something like corruption can happen without people noticing for a long time, because they're just kind of like bodies that can get churned through.
Okay, yeah. So the current thing with Dark Tide is that they're in beta. It's coming out like actually for real later on down the line. But it is a little bit more ranged focused. It's a little bit more about cover shooting than sort of the very like ranged is a thing obviously in Vermintide, and you want to have ranged characters to kind of like deal with like far away threats and everything like that. But like most of that game is very like melee heavy, where you're kind of like chopping through stuff, and ranged ammo is a real premium resource, right? Like you can't use your ammunition willy-nilly, because you are going to fuck yourself if you sort of do that. Dark Side, I had less of that problem. I basically had infinite ammo the entire time I was playing, because I do think that just because it is more like range focus, it's sort of like built for that. But it has a lot of the hallmarks of the combat that were that are expected from Vermintide in terms of like blocking, heavy attacks, light attacks, parrying, all that kind of stuff, which is really interesting. They're also going to be adding new classes to the game that are straight up classes, right? So like right now, basically the character, like the class is bespoke, whereas so in Vermintide, you play a character, and that character has different careers, right? So, for instance, you can play the version of Corellian, where she's a Waystalker, Stalker, which is like Wood Elf. She's a Handmaiden, which is like High Elf. She's a Shade, which is like dark elf, right? Those are different careers, but it's all the same character, and she shares kind of the same fundamentals. Darktide doesn't have that. Darktide is like completely new fundamentals every time there's a new class, which I think is kind of neat and kind of interesting. My hope is that they can do some really interesting stuff. Like right now, it's all human classes, right? But obviously, 40K has a lot of really interesting stuff you can do with Eldar, Dark Eldar, like Tau. Like I said,
There's an Ogren over all of the advertising. Are you counting that as part of it?
yes, so the Ogren is one of the base is like one of the base classes. And maybe we'll get into a world where there can be green skins. Everybody loves green skins in 40K because they do shit through the power of thought, right? Will, I guess, in a way, dumb luck. And so anyway, that was like the last neat thing that I did was play the Dark Side beta.
There, I thought of one more thing to talk about, just because I know, Lou has been following along with the Great British Bake Off as well. So, like 3 weeks ago at this point, they had an episode where there was like a pizza round, and I was furious at it, and I was nearly clawing my eyes out. But the big thing was, like, I guess it's 2 weeks ago now, they did a Mexican week. And it was a fucking train wreck. Like,
oh my god, the avocado thing. I just saw this on Twitter. The screenshots of the guy slicing through the avocado pit. That's real, right? Did that happen?
Oh yeah, so I think some of this is like forgivable from like a kind, like there's this old woman, Carol. She's like a bagger at like a grocery store, and she clearly does not know what Mexican food is, right?
Oh no.
Like one of the tests is like, so the middle round of every Great British Bake Off is a technical skills challenge. First of all, it was tacos, which was like, I think it was terrible. First of all, everybody on the fucking show called them tacos, which is like, but like half the people I don't think knew what guacamole was. Like this old British bagger woman who is very nice, clearly had no idea what it was, and called it like Glockymolo, and like 7 different bastardizations of it. They were just like, oh no, why are they doing? And also the tacos were like it was like a very like weirdly like specific. It was like it felt kind of almost like a, not quite a Taco Bell taco, but it's like it felt like it had too many ingredients on it. Right? It was like all these like fixings and like steak tacos. It's like this is like the platonic ideal of like a taco. It felt very weird. I was not pleased with this episode. I just didn't think it was like a good. It was also like very open ended. Like I've had issues with the way some of the technical challenges go, just because I feel like there's in some ways unfair. It's like it feels like if you know how to do the thing, you just kind of like win the challenge, which is like not, I think, good show design. I think there's better ways to do it. But like the first thing was like, make a sweet bread, and like they got to choose which one they did, but like I think like most of them did conscious of some sort, and like I just basically don't trust Paul Hollywood and Prue, who are the two judges, to know what good
conscious are like.
Yeah, like I don't know. It was kind of a train wreck of a show. Plus, there's like some like to some of our earlier points, some like dubious kind of jokes in there that maybe like crossed the line in a couple places, but nothing super like like overtly racist, but things like the hosts open the episode by being in sombreros and ponchos, which is like right, like like maybe not so bad, but maybe like you don't want to do that type of deal. But I just want to talk about that because like I said, I know one of our loyal viewers watches the show as well. So
hell yeah, man, maybe I should watch the Great British Bake Off.
I think so. Honestly, it is the only reality show I've ever gotten myself invested in. I think normally it's very fun. I get behind the characters, and it's less adversarial. It's like not really adversarial at all. It's mostly kind of just like kind of like pure kind of like positive competition, if that makes sense, right? It's not like people sabotaging each other or yelling at each other. It's people building each other up, and hopefully everyone wins, right? Like, not everyone can win, but everybody wants everybody to perform at their best and do the do their best. So I think it's a very gentle show, and it's very good. Also, the theme song makes for a great alarm if you need a new alarm sound. Lou in the chat says, so fun fact, they do a foreign country week every year, and it's always cringe. You know what? Yeah, I believe that. It is tough, especially if you do a foreign country like that's like just so far away from Britain that like I think you could do like an America week and it wouldn't be so bad. But it is what it is. Yeah, but yeah, that was the last big thing of my week is I watched the Great British Bake Off again. All right.
Okay.
Well, with that, I'm going to say, if you'd like to email us about any of the things we talk about on this podcast, you can email us at derpsgames@gmail.com or podcast@derpsgames.com. You can follow us at twitch.tv/derpsgames where you can watch these go out live. Sorry, I want to read a couple of these comments from Lou. They did actual Mexican food this year. Previously on Japan Week, let's cram every Asian country into this week, which sounds about right for the Great British Bake Off. Anyway, sorry. Get back to the end of show announcements. Rate, review us on everywhere. Everything's good. This is a great show. You should watch it more. But you have anything you want to promote?
I do not have anything I'm looking to promote.
All right. You're gonna have an announcement next week. Am I allowed to tease that?
I guess I will say the announcement exists. People know about it. The Aquapara Games is going to be featured in the Mix Next publisher showcase, which is sort of like a indie game miniature version of like an like a Nintendo Indie Direct, right? But it's like all Aquapara games. That was announced last Thursday. It's going to be next Thursday, and it's going to just include all of these things that are like Aquapara games related. So that's going to be the big thing. We're doing a watch party in the Discord, actually, in the Aquapara Games Discord, and then I'm doing an AMA afterwards where I'm just going to be answering questions from people about the stuff that came in the showcase. So we'll see. Anyway, that's it for me.
That's Thursday the 27th.
Thursday the 27th.
And what time is it at?
It is at noon, but I actually don't know when we're going on. Like, it could be anywhere.
Noon Pacific.
Pacific, yeah, Pacific, right? Shit, it's got to be Pacific.
Yeah, sorry. I don't mean to I'm not trying to pull this out of you. I am just curious myself because I think
they are in Pacific, so it's going to be noon Pacific.
All right. Well, with that, I'm going to say until next time, dear listeners.
Until next time, loyal listeners.